Ever wonder what lunch looked like for a student back in 1350? Could they grab a soda between classes? Did they ever order a pizza? Get ready to unwrap the startling truth about how different student diets were then compared to now. Number 1. Food preparation and cooking. A medieval student, perhaps young Thomas, rising with the sun in a damp, chilly university dormitory. His first task might not be cracking open a textbook, but rather assisting with the day's cooking preparations. Forget the sleek, stainless steel kitchens of today, with their electric ovens, microwaves, and instant hot water taps. Thomas's kitchen was a vast, smoky, communal space, often shared by many students and staff, or even entire households. If he lived in a private residence, the hearth, a large stone fireplace, dominated the room. It was the heart of all culinary activity. A roaring fire, fueled by logs gathered from nearby forests or purchased from woodcutters, was a constant presence. Cooking was a laborious and time-consuming affair, demanding patience and a strong tolerance for smoke. Meat, if available, would be roasted on a spit, turned slowly over the open flames for hours by a designated cook or a younger student on rotation. The smell of sizzling fat and roasting flesh would fill the air, a scent utterly unlike the quick sear of a modern pan or the clean sizzle of an air fryer. For stews and porridges, large iron cauldrons hung suspended over the fire from a sturdy chain, their contents bubbling slowly, often for the better part of a day. Constant tending of the fire, the need to adjust the height of the cauldron, the stirring of thick gruel-like mixtures, these were all manual tasks. There were no temperature dials or timers. The cook's experience and intuition guided the process. Vegetables, root crops like turnips or carrots and leafy greens, if they were in season and not too costly, would be boiled or added to these communal stews. Bread, a fundamental part of the medieval diet, was often baked in large domed outdoor ovens, heated by a long burning fire inside. Once the oven was scorching hot, the embers were raked out, and the dough loaves were carefully placed on the hot stone floor to bake. This was not an everyday occurrence for every household. Many students would rely on bread purchased from a local baker. The freshness of bread was fleeting, and stale bread was often softened with ale or used as a trencher, a thick slice serving as an edible plate. Contrast this with the modern student, perhaps young Chloe, waking up in her dorm room or apartment. Her kitchen might be a compact unit with a microwave, a small electric stove, and a refrigerator. Breakfast could be a quickly toasted bagel, a bowl of instant oatmeal prepared with boiling water from an electric kettle, or a fruit smoothie blended in seconds. Lunch might involve heating up leftovers in the microwave, ordering takeout through a smartphone app, or grabbing a pre-made sandwich from the campus convenience store. Dinner, too, is a realm of speed and convenience. A frozen pizza slides into the oven, a bag of pasta boils on the stove atop, or a meal kit, with pre-portioned ingredients and step-by-step instructions, promises a gourmet experience in under 30 minutes. The entire process is cyanide, automated, and individualized. There is no communal hearth, no shared cauldron, no smoke-filled room. Cooking smells, if any, are contained by ventilation fans. Dishes are washed in dishwashers or quickly by hand in sinks with hot and cold running water. The immediacy of modern cooking is a stark departure from the long, slow communal processes of the medieval era. Even the tools are different. While medieval cooks used heavy iron pots, wooden spoons, and rough knives, modern students wield lightweight, non-stick pans, silicone spatulas, and precision-engineered cutlery. The modern student's food journey often begins and ends with packaging, while Thomas's journey involved raw ingredients, manual effort, and a deep connection to the natural world and the community around him. The very act of preparing food was a form of labor and social interaction, something largely lost in the self-contained, digitally driven world of today's student. Number 2. Dietary traditions and beliefs. Medieval student life, much like all medieval life, was deeply intertwined with the prevailing religious beliefs and social structures of the time. For young scholars pursuing knowledge in the universities of Oxford, Paris, or Bologna, their diets were heavily influenced by the Christian calendar. This meant regular fast days, where certain foods were forbidden, and a strict adherence to seasons of abstinence. For example, during Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter, meat, eggs, and dairy products were typically excluded from the diet. This was not a personal choice or a health trend, but a religious obligation. Students, like everyone else, would subsist on fish, vegetables, and bread during these periods. Fridays throughout the year were also fast days, as were the eves of major feast days. This meant that the staple protein for much of the week would be fish, often salted or dried to preserve it, especially for students living in inland university towns. The variety of fish available depended on proximity to rivers or coastal areas, but cod, herring, and pike were common. These fasting rules significantly shaped the medieval students' menu, pushing them towards a more plant-based and pescatarian diet for substantial portions of the year. Beyond religious dictates, social hierarchy also played a part. Students from wealthier families might have access to more refined ingredients, while poorer students were largely reliant on charitable donations or the simplest, most affordable foodstuffs. Their diet reflected their status, often consisting of more gruel and less meat, more coarse bread and fewer exotic spices. Dietary choices, therefore, were less about personal preference and more about collective observance and economic reality. There were no vegan or gluten-free movements based on ethical or health philosophies as we understand them today. Any restrictions were either imposed by religious doctrine or by the limitations of poverty. The modern student, by contrast, navigates a vast landscape of personal dietary choices and restrictions, many of which stem from health considerations, ethical beliefs, or cultural preferences. Allergies, a significant modern concern, directly impact diet. A student with a peanut allergy, for instance, must meticulously check food labels and inquire about ingredients when dining out. This necessitates careful planning and often means avoiding certain communal meals or popular dishes. Gluten intolerance or celiac disease leads students to seek out gluten-free alternatives for bread, pasta, and baked goods, a concept utterly alien to medieval cooks. Beyond medical necessities, ethical considerations drive many modern dietary choices. Vegetarianism, which excludes all meat, and veganism, which further excludes all animal products like dairy, eggs, and honey, are increasingly common. These choices are often rooted in concerns for animal welfare, environmental sustainability, or personal health philosophies. A modern student choosing a plant-based diet will actively seek out plant-based milk alternatives, meat substitutes, and a diverse range of fruits, vegetables, and legumes. Religious dietary laws still exist for some modern students, such as halal for Muslims or kosher for Jewish students, influencing how meat is prepared or which foods are consumed. However, even these traditional restrictions often offer a wider range of commercially available pre-prepared options compared to the medieval era. The modern student's plate is a reflection of individual agency, scientific understanding of nutrition, and a globalized food system that caters to a multitude of dietary needs and desires. Contrast is clear. Medieval diet was largely prescribed by external forces, while the modern diet is a complex interplay of personal conviction, health, science, and unprecedented availability. Number 3. Dairy and eggs. For the medieval student, Dairy and eggs were valuable, yet often seasonally and geographically dependent, components of the diet. Milk, primarily from cows but also from goats or sheep, was a common beverage in rural areas or near farms. However, its perishability meant it was not universally available, especially in larger towns or for students living in dormitories without direct access to livestock or proper storage. There was no refrigeration, so milk would sour quickly. This led to a preference for processed dairy products like cheese and butter, which lasted longer. Cheese in particular was a staple. Hard cheeses could be stored for extended periods, providing a concentrated source of protein and fat. Different regions produced different types of cheese, from fresh curds to aged hard varieties, each offering distinct flavors and textures. Butter was also made, but often in smaller quantities and used more as a cooking fat or a spread for bread, particularly in wealthier households. Eggs, primarily from chickens, were also a seasonal product. Hens laid fewer eggs in the colder months of winter, making them more abundant in spring and summer. They were a prized source of protein and could be boiled, scrambled, or incorporated into various dishes, though often reserved for special occasions or for those with direct access to poultry. During religious fast days, as previously mentioned, dairy and eggs were often forbidden, further impacting their consumption patterns. A student like young Thomas would understand that the availability of milk and eggs fluctuated with the seasons and the demands of the church calendar. Their quality and freshness were directly tied to the proximity of the farm and the absence of spoilage. Fast forward to the modern student, and the dairy and egg landscape is utterly transformed. Refrigeration and advanced processing techniques have made milk a ubiquitous and readily available beverage year-round, regardless of location. Students can choose from whole milk, skim milk, lactose-free milk, and an ever-expanding array of plant-based milks like almond, soy, oat, and rice milk. These alternatives cater to health, preferences, allergies, or ethical choices, a level of choice unimaginable in the medieval period. Eggs are equally accessible. They are available by the dozen in supermarkets, usually graded for size and often carrying labels like free-range, organic, or cage-free, reflecting modern consumer concerns about animal welfare. Students can easily whip up scrambled eggs for breakfast, add a fried egg to a ramen noodle dish, or bake with eggs without concern for seasonality or immediate spoilage. Cheese, too, has evolved from a regional staple to a global industry. Supermarket shelves are packed with hundreds of varieties, from fresh mozzarella to aged cheddar, imported brie and processed cheese slices for sandwiches. Butter, margarine, and a host of other spreads are readily available. The modern student relies on dairy and eggs as convenient, affordable sources of protein and fat, often without a second thought about their origin or the time of year. The fear of spoilage is largely absent, replaced by expiration dates printed on packaging. The distance between the farm and the student's plate has grown immense, often involving large-scale industrial production, pasteurization, and extensive transportation networks, a stark contrast to the direct, localized, and seasonal nature of dairy and egg consumption for their medieval counterparts. Number 4. Vegetables and fruits. For the medieval student, the consumption of vegetables and fruits was inextricably linked to the rhythm of the seasons and the immediate local environment. There were no global supply chains or refrigerated trucks bringing produce from distant lands. If a student was lucky enough to be in a region with fertile soil and a good climate, their diet might include a modest variety of greens, root vegetables, and fruits when they were in season. Common vegetables included cabbages, onions, garlic, leeks, carrots, turnips, and parsnips. These were often grown in local gardens or fields and would be consumed fresh during the growing season. In winter, fresh produce became scarce. Root vegetables that could be stored in cool, dark cellars, like carrots and turnips, would be a lifeline. Cabbages might be preserved through fermentation, creating something akin to sauerkraut, which provided essential vitamins during the lean months. Lentils, peas, and beans dried for storage were also crucial, offering a vital source of protein and fiber when other options were limited. These legumes would be soaked and then boiled into thick porridges or stews. Fruits were a seasonal luxury. Apples, pears, cherries, and plums were common in orchards. Berries like strawberries and raspberries would be gathered from the wild in summer. Grapes, if available, were often used for wine production, though fresh grapes were enjoyed when ripe. However, once the short season for a particular fruit passed, it was gone until the next year. Preservation methods were basic: drying for fruits like apples and pears, or making jams and jellies with honey, but these were labor-intensive and not always widely practiced. The medieval student's plate often looked quite earthy and rustic, relying heavily on sturdy filling root vegetables and legumes, supplemented by leafy greens and fruits only when nature allowed. Variety was low, and the diet was heavily influenced by the bounty of the specific region and the time of year. The modern student lives in an era of unprecedented choice and year-round availability when it comes to vegetables and fruits. Supermarket aisles burst with colorful produce from every corner of the globe, regardless of the season. A student in a northern city can purchase fresh strawberries in December or avocados from Mexico in July. Lettuce, spinach, and other leafy greens are available pre-washed and bagged, ready for immediate consumption. Exotic fruits like mangoes, kiwis, and pineapples are commonplace alongside more traditional apples, oranges, and bananas. A modern student can easily incorporate a wide array of vegetables into their daily meals: broccoli, bell peppers, zucchini, asparagus, and sweet potatoes, often sourced from thousands of miles away and transported efficiently. Frozen vegetables provide another convenient option, offering nutritional value without the need for extensive preparation or concern about spoilage. The concept of seasonality, while still relevant for local farmers' markets, has largely faded from the everyday consumer experience. Students can enjoy a rainbow of fresh produce that medieval scholars could only dream of. This globalized access allows for immense dietary diversity, providing a broader spectrum of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants throughout the year. The modern student's vegetable and fruit intake is a matter of personal choice and convenience, rather than a strict adherence to local seasonal cycles. This constant availability contributes to a dramatically different nutritional profile and dining experience compared to their medieval predecessors. Number 5. Spice usage. In the medieval world, spices held a status far beyond mere flavor enhancers. They were symbols of wealth, power, and prestige, often used in astonishing quantities for preservation, medicinal purposes, and to mask the taste of less than fresh food. For the average medieval student, especially those from humble backgrounds, access to these exotic ingredients was limited, if not entirely non-existent. Common spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger traveled vast distances from Asia and Africa along dangerous trade routes, making them incredibly expensive commodities. A pinch of pepper could be worth more than a day's wages for a laborer. Universities, perhaps, might have used a little more spice in their common halls if their patrons were wealthy, but even then, it was a precious resource. When spices were used, they were often ground roughly and incorporated into rich, thick sauces or meat dishes, sometimes in combinations that would strike a modern palate as unusual. They were also believed to aid digestion and balance the humors of the body, reflecting the medieval understanding of health and medicine. Their strong flavors also help to extend the palatability of preserved or slightly aged meats and fish, which were a common feature of the diet due to the lack of refrigeration. The student from a well-off family might occasionally taste a dish subtly flavored with saffron or cardamom, but for the majority, their food relied on the natural flavors of the ingredients, perhaps enhanced with locally grown herbs like parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, which were far more accessible. The daily diet of most medieval students would have been quite plain by comparison, relying on salt for seasoning. Fast forward to the modern student, and spices are a commonplace, affordable, and global pantry staple. Supermarket aisles are filled with hundreds of different spices from around the world, from basic salt and black pepper to exotic blends like garam masala, za'atar, and smoked paprika. Students can buy ground turmeric for a curry, chili flakes for a pizza, or cumin for tacos, all for a few dollars. This novelty and accessibility have completely democratized spice usage. Modern students use spices primarily for flavor, experimenting with international cuisines and personalizing their meals. They don't need spices to mask spoilage, thanks to refrigeration and stringent food safety standards. Nor do they rely on them as primary medicinal agents, with modern medicine having taken over that role. Instead, spices are integral to culinary creativity and the pursuit of diverse tastes. A student might sprinkle cinnamon in their oatmeal, add cayenne pepper to a stir, fry or marinate chicken in a complex mixture of dried herbs and spices. The ability to access a vast array of spices means modern students can effortlessly recreate dishes from almost any culture, expanding their palates and turning cooking into an adventurous exploration. The difference is not just in quantity or availability, but in the very purpose and perception of spices. From rare, precious commodities signifying status and masking imperfections, they had transformed into everyday tools for enhancing taste and expressing culinary freedom. Number 6. Sweeteners. For the medieval student, the world of sweet flavors was a very different place. Refined white sugar as we know it today was a rare and incredibly expensive commodity, primarily used by the very wealthy for medicinal purposes or as a display of extreme luxury. It was not a common part of the everyday diet. Instead, the primary sweetener was honey. Beekeeping was a widespread practice, and honey was collected from hives and used to sweeten drinks, porridges, and some baked goods. Its flavor varied depending on the flowers the bees visited, and it was appreciated for its natural sweetness and purported health benefits beyond honey. Natural sweetness came directly from fruits. Apples, pears, plums, and berries, when in season and ripe, provided bursts of natural sugars. Dried fruits, such as raisins, figs, and dates, also offered concentrated sweetness and could be stored for longer periods, providing a valuable source of energy and a treat during the leaner months. These dried fruits were often incorporated into pies, puddings, or simply eaten as snacks. For drinks, students might have access to fruit juices or cider, which also offered a touch of natural sweetness. The overall level of sweetness in the medieval diet was significantly lower than today. Sweet dishes were not as common, and the sweetness itself was more subtle, integrated with the natural flavors of the ingredients. A student like young Thomas would have a simpler, less saccharine palate, accustomed to the earthy tastes of grains and vegetables, with sweet notes provided by nature's bounty and the precious golden output of bees. Concept of dessert as a distinct sugar-laden course was not a widespread daily occurrence. Now consider the modern student's relationship with sweetness. Refined sugar is omnipresent, woven into the fabric of countless processed foods and beverages, from breakfast cereals to yogurt, from pre-made sauces to bread. Sugar is an almost invisible ingredient in the everyday diet. Students can buy large bags of granulated sugar for baking at minimal cost. Beyond plain sugar, a vast array of artificial sweeteners and high fructose corn syrup also contribute to the overwhelming sweetness of modern food products. Soft drinks, energy drinks, and sweetened coffees are consumed daily, often containing many times the sugar found in medieval beverages. Dessert, is a common, often expected part of a meal or a frequent snack. Cakes, cookies, chocolates, ice cream, and candies are readily available and consumed regularly. Even healthy snacks often contain added sugars. This constant exposure to high levels of sweetness means the modern student's palate is conditioned to expect and crave intense sugary flavors. Natural fruit, while still consumed, often competes with intensely flavored, artificially sweetened options. The ease of access to sugary treats, from vending machines to convenience stores and fast food chains, means that a sugar fix is always just moments away. This stark difference in the availability and consumption of sweeteners has profound implications for taste preferences, nutritional intake, and overall health. The modern student lives in a world awash in sugar, a complete reversal from the naturally sweetened, less intense flavors that defined the medieval student's diet. Number 7. Meat consumption. Meat, for the medieval student, was a highly valued but often limited and precarious part of the diet. Its availability depended heavily on social standing, location, and the liturgical calendar. Wealthier students or those attending well-endowed universities or monasteries might have access to roasted or stewed meats more regularly. For the common student, meat was more often a luxury or a seasonal treat, typically reserved for feast days or special occasions. When meat was consumed, it was usually beef, pork, or mutton. Poultry, like chicken or goose, might also be available. The methods of preservation were crucial due to the absence of refrigeration. Salting, smoking, and drying were common techniques. This meant that much of the meat consumed would have a strong, cured flavor, very different from the fresh cuts available today. Imagine Thomas, the medieval student, gnawing on a piece of heavily salted beef, tough and chewy, but providing much-needed calories and protein. Hunting provided some meat, but this was generally reserved for the nobility. Poaching, though illegal, also contributed to the diets of some common people. Fish, as mentioned earlier, was a vital protein source, especially during the numerous fast days mandated by the church when meat was forbidden. Even for those with access to meat, variety was limited. Supermarkets with endless cuts of different animals were unimaginable. The meat supply was local, often from animals raised nearby, and slaughtering and butchering were often communal or local processes. The emphasis was on utilizing every part of the animal to avoid waste, a practice that included organ meats and less desirable cuts that are often overlooked in modern diets. In dramatic contrast, the modern student enjoys unprecedented access to a vast array of meats with nearly limitless choices regarding cut type and preparation. Supermarkets offer fresh beef, pork, chicken, turkey, and lamb, alongside more exotic options like duck, venison, and even bison, all readily available and typically pre-packaged. Refrigeration and freezing technology ensure that meat remains fresh for extended periods, eliminating the need for heavy salting or smoking for preservation, which were the main methods in medieval times. This means modern meat is generally much less salty and more tender. A student like Chloe can choose from lean chicken breasts for a healthy stir-fry, ground beef for quick tacos, or a prime steak for a special occasion. Beyond the basic cuts, there's a huge variety of processed meats, sausages, bacon, deli slices, and countless ready-to-eat meals containing meat. Fast food restaurants and takeout services make meat-centric meals instantly accessible, from burgers to fried chicken sandwiches. While some modern students opt for plant-based diets, for those who eat meat, the convenience and variety are astounding. The global supply chain means meat can come from farms thousands of miles away, processed in industrial facilities, and delivered quickly to local stores. This contrasts sharply with the medieval experience where meat was local, seasonally influenced, and often cured, highlighting the vast divide in availability, preservation, and choice between the two eras. Number 8. Meal structure and frequency. The medieval student's day was structured around a distinct pattern of meals, significantly different from the fluid, often continuous eating habits of today. For young Thomas, the day typically began with a very early meal, possibly around sunrise, known as disjune or breakfast. This was often a simple affair, perhaps a piece of coarse bread with some ale or leftover pottage from the previous night. It was more about breaking the overnight fast and providing energy for the early hours of study or labor rather than the elaborate breakfast spreads common in many modern homes. The main meal of the day, known as dinner, was eaten much earlier than modern dinner. It usually took place around midday, between 10 a.m. and noon. This was the largest and most substantial meal, designed to provide the bulk of the day's sustenance. It might consist of pottage or stew, a chunk of bread, perhaps some cheese or fish if available, and possibly a piece of meat on feast days. This meal was often communal, eaten in a university hall or a monastic refectory, reflecting the collective nature of medieval life. After dinner, there was a significant break before the final meal of the day, supper, which was eaten in the late afternoon or early evening, typically between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. Supper was generally lighter than dinner, often consisting of leftovers or simpler fare like bread and cheese. Snacking between these formal meals was not a common practice. Food was too precious and meal times too regimented. There were no vending machines, no convenience stores, and no concept of quick bites. A student felt hunger and waited for the next scheduled meal, consuming what was provided. This structure reflected the daily rhythm of work, prayer, and study, which often began at dawn and concluded before nightfall. The modern student lives in a world where meal times are highly flexible and snacking is a constant possibility. For Chloe, breakfast can be a quick grab-and-go item at 7 a.m. or a leisurely brunch at 11 a.m. Lunch might be a quick bite from a food truck or a full meal in a campus cafeteria, consumed anywhere from noon to 2 p.m., depending on her class schedule. Dinner, the main meal for many modern students, often happens in the late evening, sometimes past 7 p.m., reflecting late study sessions or social engagements. The most striking difference is the pervasive culture of snacking. Modern students can easily access food between meals from numerous sources. Vending machines in dorms, campus coffee shops, convenience stores, and personal mini-fridges stocked with a vast array of processed snacks, energy bars, fruit, and yogurt. Students might eat multiple small meals or snack continuously throughout the day. The concept of 3 square meals is often replaced by grazing, fueled by easy access to pre-packaged foods and ubiquitous food outlets. Delivery apps allow food to be ordered and consumed at any time, anywhere. This means a modern student can manage their hunger instantly, without waiting for fixed meal times. This flexibility is a product of modern technology, convenience, culture, and a constant food supply, the stark contrast to the rigid, infrequent, and communally dictated meal structure of the medieval student. The modern student's digestive system experiences frequent input, while the medieval student's body would adapt to longer periods between substantial meals. Number 9. Processed versus whole foods. The medieval student's diet was almost entirely composed of what we would today call whole foods. This meant ingredients that were minimally processed, if at all, and consumed in their natural or near-natural state. For young Thomas, a meal might consist of a thick, coarse bread made from locally grown grains, perhaps milled nearby. This bread was dense, full of fiber, and very different from the light, airy, often refined, white bread of today. His pottage or stew would be made from vegetables grown in the local garden, legumes dried from the previous harvest, and perhaps a piece of meat from an animal raised in the vicinity. There were no factories producing pre-made sauces, no frozen dinners, no instant noodles. every ingredient was recognizable as a product of the earth or an animal. The only processing involved traditional methods like grinding grain, fermenting drinks, salting meat or fish, or making cheese and butter from raw milk. These methods were for preservation or basic preparation, not for creating complex, multi-ingredient, shelf-stable products. The flavors were earthy, natural, and often quite strong. Sweetness came from honey or fruit, not refined sugars. This diet was nutrient-dense in terms of fiber and micronutrients from natural sources, but potentially lacking in variety over the year and susceptible to spoilage. Connection to the land and the source of food was direct and undeniable. Now, let's look at the modern student's typical diet, which is heavily influenced by processed foods. Chloe, our modern student, wakes up to a breakfast cereal that has been fortified with vitamins and minerals, flavored with sugar, and often contains multiple ingredients that are difficult to pronounce. Her snack could be a pre-packaged granola bar, a bag of potato chips, or a candy bar, all highly processed, engineered for taste, and designed for convenience. Lunch might be a fast food burger with a bun made from refined flour and a patty that has been machine-formed. Dinner could be a frozen meal, a canned soup, or instant ramen, all of which have undergone extensive industrial processing, including the addition of preservatives, artificial flavors, and colors. Even seemingly simple items like bread are often made with highly refined flours, added sugars, and dough conditioners. The modern student's palate is accustomed to the intense, often artificial, flavors of processed foods. While fresh fruits, vegetables, and whole grains are available, many students rely on the convenience and low cost of processed options. This shift has led to a diet that often contains higher levels of refined sugars, unhealthy fats, and sodium, while potentially being lower in natural fiber and certain micronutrients found in whole foods. The journey from farm to plate for the modern student's food is often a complex industrial one, involving multiple stages of manufacturing, packaging, and long-distance transportation, a stark contrast to the direct, simple relationship with food that characterized the medieval student's life. Number 10. Water versus ale, or wine. For the medieval student, the primary source of hydration was almost certainly not clean fresh water, as we understand it today. Access to potable water was a constant challenge. Rivers and wells were often contaminated by human and animal waste, making drinking untreated water a risky endeavor that could lead to serious illness or even death. Therefore, students, like most people in medieval society, turned to fermented beverages as their daily source of hydration. Ale was the most common drink consumed by everyone, regardless of age or social standing. It was a low-alcohol beer, brewed from grains like barley or oats. The brewing process, involving boiling the water during mashing, served to kill harmful bacteria, making ale much safer to drink than water. Students would drink ale with every meal, and often throughout the day during study sessions. It was considered a nutritious beverage, providing calories and some vitamins, and it was significantly weaker than modern beers, allowing for consumption in large quantities without constant intoxication. The ale was often brewed locally, sometimes even within the university or monastic grounds. Wine was also consumed, especially in regions where grapes were grown, or by wealthier students. Wine, like ale, was safer than water due to its alcohol content and the fermentation process. Water was largely reserved for specific uses, such as washing or mixed with wine for diluting. The idea of a student simply filling a bottle with tap water or buying a plastic bottle of purified water was utterly unimaginable. Their very survival relied on the fermented liquid that accompanied every bite of food. The modern student, by contrast, lives in a world where clean, safe drinking water is largely taken for granted and universally accessible. Tap water in developed countries undergoes rigorous filtration and treatment processes, making it safe for direct consumption. Students can fill water bottles from fountains, drink from the tap, or purchase bottled water from stores. This ubiquitous access to clean water means that water is the primary source of hydration for most students, consumed freely throughout the day. Beyond water, modern students have an enormous variety of beverages available. Sodas, with their high sugar content and diverse flavors, are a popular choice. Energy drinks, fruit juices, sweetened teas, and a vast array of coffee concoctions are consumed regularly, often without a second thought about safety or availability. While alcoholic beverages like beer, wine, and spirits are consumed, they are typically seen as recreational drinks, not as a primary source of daily hydration or nutrition. The modern student's choice of beverage is driven by taste, preference, caffeine needs, or social norms, rather than the desperate necessity for safe fluid intake. Contrast is stark. Medieval students drank fermented beverages out of necessity to avoid disease, whereas modern students drink clean water by default and choose from a seemingly endless selection of other safe beverages for enjoyment and specific purposes. This fundamental difference in daily fluid intake highlights a massive leap in public health and infrastructure over the centuries.